aussi avec nous
as well with us
les comptables
is
professionnels agréés du Canada, représentant les comptables agréés du Canada.
representative of the Chartered Professional Accountants of Canada, Ms. Rosemary McGuire. So as you know, the witnesses have 5 minutes in order to deliver your opening remarks. And after that time, we will proceed to the question-answer period. If I may, I'd like to begin with Professor Chenet, please. Good morning. Thank you, Chair. And ladies and gentlemen of the committee, I'd like to start by saying a few words about my background to, first of all, speak to where I come from. First of all, I come from the earth sciences. I'm a geophysicist at heart. Then I became a financial consultant. Just before the financial crisis of 2007, I wear 2 hats. First of all, I work on market risk modeling. I also wear a hat on environmental climate risks in finance, risks that at the time were largely ignored, but we'll come back to that. In 2012, I co-founded a think tank on finance and the climate, which exerted a certain influence on public policy in France, and then in Europe, particularly in the run-up to COP21. And finally, for the last years or so, I've been entirely on the academic side. I'm a transdisciplinary researcher between management, sciences, economics, finance, accounting, and earth and environmental sciences. I'd like to share with you a number of points that I feel are essential in order to frame what I'm going to about to say. First of all, I'll begin with the climate issue, more specifically, and recently biodiversity. Finance has made a lot of progress, yes, and that's a little bit less positive because we have come from so very far away. And I think many have spoken to that. And to come back to that, when I began working in finance about 15 years ago, the major financing and investment banks were very proud about speaking to their actions on facing the climate crisis and what really wanted to do. And what they spoke about many was having changed electric light bulbs. That is what they were speaking about in the finance sector. However, very little mention was made of their actual profession, that is financing the economy, financing industry. What does this mean about the climate? And in fact, there is very little there that has been communicated. And what about fossil fuels? What about renewable energies? No comments. The major answers that you could ask them, and they said, no, that's not our fault. That's the clients. That's what they want, and we're simply there to meet with their requirements. So how do we have to qualify this right? And this is something that can have an impact. So today, the situation has greatly changed, and we will come back to this. First of all, so there has been a success. We have achieved a lot of success. Nevertheless, maybe we need to emphasize this positive point. When you look at the economy as it stands and the progress that we've achieved vis-à-vis the climate and the emissions trajectory, to a certain extent, we've noted that, pardon for this expression, but the financial sector is not doing its job in terms of decarbonizing, and we haven't seen actual progress. The economy is emitting as much carbon as before. So certainly we have reduced the increase of emissions, but we still have not attained its peak point, and the finance sector alone has not been able to manage this. And that's where the problem lies, perhaps. It is not up to the financial sector to do this work, but that's where an interesting conversation must be had. And it's again the same discussion we've had about biodiversity. To a certain extent, decarbonating the economy, and perhaps that is not the job of the financial markets, and that's Nicolas Boulot, who's a professor of financial mathematics, widely recognized in the academic community, and he's written in a number of various areas, is that the financial markets were not designed to manage the planet. It's important to remind ourselves of this. That is not what it was designed to do. So if we expect something else from them, perhaps this is a question we need to ask as to their ability to do the work. And currently, their current conditions aren't right for the economic sector to do this. That is, decarbonating must be done spontaneous. I think to date, all of this economic activity remains authorized and legal. It's also very profitable. It will therefore almost be impossible for the vast majority of financial institutions to simply drop that kind of activity. In fact, they believe that this would be, in a sense, sawing off the branch that they're actually sitting on to stop these activities. So either we change the tools or change the rules. Basically, we cannot rely entirely on finance to decarbonize the economy. Due to industrial policies, we have to change demand, and no doubt finance will follow. That's understood. Or we change the underlying rules of finance so that it can be effective and take on a true leading role in terms of decarbonizing the economy. To date, we've essentially done something else. We've gambled on the fact that as we perceive significant, even systemic financial risk on the horizon, more or less in the long term, finance will take steps to steer clear of them when it comes to investment and financing. And then we focused on disclosure, on making financial risk transparent. But these are considered for the moment to be non-material or too distant. Thank you very much. Professor Genet, unfortunately, I have to interrupt you, but you will have an opportunity to share more views more in depth in answering the questions that we will be receiving. We now turn to Mr. Tingle.
Maître Tingle, allez-y, s'il vous plaît.
Please go ahead, Mr. Tingle.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to appear before the committee. My name is Bryce Tingle. I'm the Anne Murray Edwards Chair in Business Law at the University of Calgary's Faculty of Law, and my research and writing is largely in the area of corporate governance. I'm a member of the Alberta Securities Commission, and I'm a member of the National Special Advisory Board to the RCMP's Integrated Market Enforcement Team, which investigates financial crimes. I sit on numerous boards, and I've spent my career advising boards, investors, and managers on issues relating to corporate governance. All opinions are my own and should not be attributed to any institution I'm a part of. I'm appearing before you as someone who's spent his professional life working in and studying corporate governance and corporate finance. For the record, I accept the consensus about the science of global warming contained in the most recent reports of the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. The bottom line of all my research is that there are thousands of empirical studies, and these studies generally show that corporate governance interventions of the sort produced by the financial markets do not produce their intended outcomes. This includes the long-time goals of corporate governance, which is producing better financial returns for investors and reducing executive pay. The failures of corporate governance as a channel for producing desired outcomes is a function of, first, corporations are generally embedded in competitive markets, and these markets constrain the range of behavior the corporation can undertake if it wishes to remain solvent. The average company doesn't make much over its total expenses. Second, markets produce incentive structures for managers and shareholders, and these systems of incentives militate against certain desired non-financial outcomes. Third, corporations, their people, strategies, research programs, opportunities, business partners, and competitive situations all vary so much that one-size-fits-all interventions affect them in different and unexpected ways, and occasionally counterproductive ways. And fourth, the most prominent tools used by corporate governance reformers, disclosure requirements and investor pressure, are not suited to the task for various reasons. Given the limited amount of time I have, I'll talk about 3 examples of governance failures that are relevant to ESG. The first is disclosure. Most investors do not have the knowledge or incentives to read or accurately process most of the disclosure we provide, and this is particularly true of rather complex environmental disclosure. As a result, investors tend to rely on third parties to produce ESG ratings or rankings. There are over a dozen empirical studies that find these ratings are invalid. Different ESG companies rate the same company in very, very different ways. The disagreements between these companies about the environmental merits of companies appears to be increasing over time. There are several studies that show that ESG ratings are very poor predictors of future environmental or social performance. Studies also show that disclosure discourages innovation since it provides competitors with the ability to replicate successful initiatives and avoid failures. As a result, companies stop innovating. They will wait for others in a version of the free riding problem. Disclosure requirements also cause companies to behave defensively in an area. ESG activities, if required to be disclosed, can become less ambitious in order to avoid lawsuits or subsequent criticisms for failures. Second example is financial divestment, which doesn't work. The value of a company's shares is a function of the company's future cash flows. For this reason, divestment does not affect share value. We know this from multiple studies. Several studies find no evidence of the cost of capital increasing for bad ESG performers. There is also no sign, at least in public markets, of lower costs of capital for good ESG companies. Another problem is that divestment is too crude. A recent study found that the majority of environmental, progressive, green patents are produced by low ESG rated companies. Usually these are old economy energy companies. This is particularly true of blockbuster environmental patents that are cited by many other patents. The researchers note that this research and development is being performed by companies that are actually excluded from ESG portfolios. The third example I'll give is about the nature of investors. They don't focus on ESG. Investor behavior is produced by strong financial incentives to keep their costs low and to maximize fund returns. ESG investors own companies with ESG profiles that are generally no better than non-ESG investors. Some studies find that ESG branded funds hold worse performing companies. Studies that look at what happens when an ESG fund buys a stake in a company find no sign of improvement in that company's environmental or social performance. My time is up. I will answer any other questions when the time comes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tingle. We'll go now to the Chartered Professional Accountants of Canada. Ms. McGuire, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. I am Rosemary McGuire, Vice President of Member Experience at Chartered Professional Accountants of Canada, known as CPA Canada. I oversee the research team focused on emerging issues in the accounting profession and capital markets. A key area of focus for us is the growing need to account for environmental impacts and increase transparency around climate-related risks and opportunities. CPA Canada is one of the most influential accounting organizations in the world. CPA Canada also supports the independent structure of accounting, assurance, and sustainability standard setting in Canada. We have been actively involved in the challenges of climate change for more than 3 decades, and we are currently an active member of the IFRS Foundation's Partnership for Capacity Building, helping to develop resources to implement international sustainability disclosure standards in Canada and globally. In my brief remarks, I will address 3 main points: the evolving expectations around sustainability issues, the importance of standards and third-party assurance, and the need for a harmonized approach and policy certainty. Sustainability is becoming increasingly important for investors and providers of capital. A report by the Bank of Canada and the Office of the Superintendent of Financial Institutions noted that the transition to a low-carbon economy will create opportunities for innovation, investment, and potential green growth. But this transition may also lead to economic dislocation and a reassessment of the value of various financial assets. Confidence in the quality of information is crucial for the integrity of our financial system and efficient capital markets. And this need extends beyond financial information to include ESG factors. Yet this demand for more transparency is leading to a trust deficit. PwC's 2023 Global Investor Survey found that 3/4 of investors and analysts consider how sustainability is managed to be important to their investment decisions. Yet only 94% believe that sustainability reporting includes unsupported claims. That brings me to my second point, the importance of sustainability standards and third-party assurance. We are seeing a push toward a global system for sustainability-related reporting. This began with the creation of the International Sustainability Standards Board, or the ISSB, which aims to develop a global baseline of sustainability disclosure standards for the capital markets. The ISSB released its inaugural standards last year, covering general sustainability disclosure requirements and climate-related disclosures. The Canadian Sustainability Standards Board was created shortly thereafter and is expected to finalize standards before the end of the year, tailoring them for the Canadian marketplace. These new standards aim for better disclosure, not just more of it. The climate disclosure standard will require companies to report on their targets and net zero commitments, along with information on the anticipated financial impacts. Materiality is a critical concept in these standards. It recognizes that different sustainability issues affect various industries in unique ways. Another important concept is proportionality, which allows for adjustments based on the capabilities and circumstances of different companies. And this is vital for the Canadian market, given the large proportion of small and medium-sized entities. Assurance plays a vital role in enhancing the reliability of ESG and climate-related information. The processes involved are similar to the audits that professional accountants have been conducting for decades. Sustainability regulation in Canada is evolving rapidly, but concerns have been raised about multiple similar proposals being introduced at the same time. These include securities regulation, the Competition Bureau's new anti-greenwashing legislation, OSFI's guideline on climate risk management, the proposed sustainable finance taxonomy, and new federal initiatives. This may lead to potentially unnecessary regulatory burden for Canadian companies facing oversight by multiple regulators. There is need for a harmonized approach. Education and capacity building are also essential. Standards and regulations that aren't well understood or properly applied won't be very effective. I have only just skimmed the surface of this very complex and evolving subject, but I would be pleased to elaborate and look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. McGuire. We'll go to questions now, and it's Mr. Mazier who will lead off for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for coming here today. Mr. Tingle, I'll start off with you. Is there any evidence that ESG branded investment funds hold more environmentally and social responsible companies in their portfolio than conventional investment funds?
There isn't much evidence of this. The Securities and Exchange Commission in the United States has been levying significant fines to a number of ESG funds that it discovers marketed themselves as ESG funds, but didn't actually make share buying and selling decisions on the basis of the ESG performance of the companies. The academic studies tend to suggest as well that I think there's at least half a dozen that find no difference between the ESG quality of the companies in ESG funds and the quality of those and the quality of companies in non-ESG branded funds. And there have been at least 3 studies published in peer-reviewed papers that find the performers in ESG funds are actually worse.
Do you believe that ESG ratings and climate-related disclosure statements are a scam?
Well, there's no question that ESG has been a very powerful marketing tool for the last 10 years. Money has flowed into funds that have advertised their ESG focus. As well, funds that don't compete for money, so these would be things like public pension funds, union funds, those funds have political masters who are very concerned about ESG, and so those funds tend to do a lot to advertise their ESG credentials. What we've seen is that these funds don't reliably hold better ESG performers. If they do anything, they apply very crude screens that just block 1 or 2 industries like automotive or oil and gas. That's about the limit. They rely on these heavily flawed ESG ratings I was talking about in my remarks, and that when we study what they actually do with the companies, we find no sign that their ESG performance, those companies' ESG performance, is improving. So it looks like this is mostly a marketing initiative on the part of the financial industry.
Won't go public if they're forced to produce climate-related disclosure statements. Is this true, and what are the consequences of this?
So what originally got me interested in our corporate governance regime is the fact that Canadians' public markets are declining quite seriously. And so Canada had about 15 or 18 years ago, it had something like 14 or 1,500 public companies. It's now got fewer than 700 operating companies. Similar declines are visible in other markets. And so I'm
Point of order, Mr. Chair. I'm so sorry to interrupt. There's just a microphone on in the room, and so there's an echo.
Okay, there's a microphone. Sorry, I'm going to stop. There's a microphone on in the room. Is that? Again. Sorry, Mr. Tingle. Sir.
No problem. Yeah, I can hear the echo as well, for what it's worth. Okay, that's better. If it works for everyone else, okay. So we have this growing reluctance of companies to go public. In practice, that means that Canadian companies choose to sell themselves as a way of generating liquidity for their investors. And in many important industries like technology and pharmaceuticals, selling themselves means selling themselves to a foreign company, usually an American company. Our public markets are generally where companies have scaled up. So I've been very concerned about why companies are refusing to go public. And I think the increasing regulation we impose on companies when they go public is the most likely explanation.
There was an article in the Financial Post on Justin Trudeau's top economic advisor, Mark Carney, who was forced to retract his false claims about his company's environmental record. The article stated, and I quote, "Mark Carney walks back, claims Brookfield has reached net zero after criticism. Backlash from climate experts hinged on Carney's use of avoided emissions, which a company takes credit for refraining from high polluting actions," end quote. Can you tell us what happens to ESG investing when companies greenwash their environmental record?
Yeah, I mean, so you've got two possible explanations for finance's poor performance, the financial market's poor performance on ESG. One explanation is, well, they're just not being given accurate information by the companies. And certainly there are lots of reasons, lots of incentives for companies to put the best face on their ESG performance. I tend to think fraud is not common, but there's a lot of spin in ESG reporting. The other reason to believe that, to expect that the financial market's done a poor job is that the incentives of fund managers are very strongly to generate strong relative returns in their funds. And doing that is where they invest most of their time and energy, not in reading lengthy and complex ESG disclosure, much of which is inadequate because in order to evaluate a company's ESG performance, you have to understand the alternatives strategically and in their markets to decide whether or not they're taking the right path for the company. We don't see that level of engagement in any topic in corporate governance, including straightforward topics like executive compensation or maximizing financial returns. Corporate governance generally gets ignored by investors aside from rhetoric.
Would this be considered fraudulent?
Well, the SEC's, as I say, the SEC has levied some truly eye-popping fines against ESG funds that aren't doing what the marketing material says they'll do.
Okay, thank you. I'll go to Mr. Longfield.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for preparing to be here for your presentations and taking questions. I'm going to start with Ms. McGuire. When we look at the financial auditing and requirements around taxonomy of what words are used in terms of defining ESG goals and how the accounting industry is working internationally to try and get the standards to which we can audit. Could you comment on the progress on that, please?
So you're exactly right. In order to audit, you need a sound financial or reporting framework to audit against, and that's why these international standards are so critical. So the focus has been on that, and as I said, progress is being made here in Canada to issue our version of those international standards before the end of the year. There is progress being made with respect to auditing standards for sustainability assurance engagements, and we do expect that those standards will be published shortly as well.
this morning, and I've also heard it in another meeting, that the 17 Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations were just marketing and just fluff. Could you comment on where those standards are at in terms of reaching into the accounting industry? I know I was on the Public Accounts Committee. It's something the Auditor General of Canada and all Auditors General across Canada are working towards auditing against the 17 SDGs. Is that something that the industry is working on?
I can't speak specifically to that. The standards that I referred to earlier, those are actually standards that are solely targeted for the capital markets use. So it would be another set of standards that the engagement to which you're referring to would be applicable.
Thanks. And my final question with you, and then I'm going to go to Monsieur Chenet, is as we develop these standards internationally, I know Canada and Argentina had done a lot of work as part of a subcommittee of the United Nations. Is there implementation goals that we are working now towards? I haven't had an update on that lately.
I'm not familiar with that, so I can't speak to it, unfortunately.
Fair enough to say that if the standards are changing globally, it is a fluid market in terms of standards. Measuring backwards won't be as important as measuring forwards.
Well, it's interesting because the standards that I referred to, the international ones, actually contain quite a bit of forward-looking information. So to your point, it's important to reflect on where you've been and important to assess the progress that's being made, but more importantly, be able to anticipate challenges ahead. So I think it's important to recognize that forward-looking aspect of these standards.
Monsieur Chenet, you mentioned your work in France. That got my attention. France has been quite involved with the international standards. Could you expand on that a little bit, on how maybe we are looking at transferring some of the lessons that you've been learning internationally into the Canadian market?
Thank you. Thanks a lot for your question. Well, depends if we are talking about regulation in general, which is now very much pushed at European level, or things much more oriented to the financial market. So what is very interesting in what happened in France, and the story is maybe oversimplistic, is that because France organized the COP21 in Paris, before setting it up, it would have been nice to show some things, and as the one very crucial ingredient for the climate diplomacy discussion was on the finance part, there was a kind of push behind the scene before the COP was held to probably have something happening. And at the end of the day, 6 months or 3 months before, we had a law in France asking for the first time ever financial stakeholders in the investment community to communicate about their climate action, and with a lot of different items. And it was just before the COP21. So I think having to promote something was also very positive for France as a regulator, and also for the Paris Agreement, which at the end of the day was reached. And as you know, inside of it, there is one of the 3 main overarching goals, which is about finance. So there is a kind of chicken and egg issue maybe here, but it was clearly good. So I think having this incentive to be under the spotlight was probably a good thing. And then what is very important, I think this would have never happened if some, not necessarily the biggest nor the most well-known, but some investors and banks, public, private, public in terms of government or private on the market, would not have pushed for it as well. So there was a kind of agreement for that. I think it was very useful.
There was a push in the cooperatives and mutuals as well. I know that the Guelph has the cooperators head office, and the former CEO of the cooperators in Guelph was very involved with the European discussions. It's not just the banks, but it's all financial institutes.
Yeah. But here in France, the major thing that was maybe under the spotlight was the investor community through asset management and the very little pension funds we have here.
Merci, Madame Posé. À vous la parole.
Thank you, Ms. Posé. Thank you very much once again to all of our witnesses. Mr. Chenet, I would like to address a question to you. You have extensive experience globally. You've worked in various countries like France. You've contributed to work at Oxford University as well. I also saw that you were invited researcher for the financial supervisory body in Japan. So in light of all of this extensive experience that you have, could you perhaps elaborate on the damages caused by Canadian banks with respect to Canada's commitments to honor those commitments worldwide when it comes to the climate? Thank you, Ms. Posé. It is true that I've been able to glean various perspectives on different global ecosystems, and the North American one is not the one that I'm the most familiar with. When it comes to Canadian banks, I don't have a specific viewpoint on it. However, what is quite visible from the outside, however, is the industrial activity of Canada, more specifically when it comes to energy generation and fossil energy production. So I dare to imagine that Canadian banks are also very much involved in supporting the Canadian economy. So necessarily there is a tie that can be brought there. And that is what we see in most countries, even though there is financing internationally in international companies, there's always a local element that is very important in finance. I don't know if that answers your question, but I also believe that even though I've been working in the finance sector for 15 years now, I tend to say that we don't so much work on finance as we do on industrial topics, and that we're trying to address the issue of fossil fuels as a resource. First of all, in order to do this, we need to understand how these various industries work, and one must have an actual desire to allow them to come out of these fossil fuel industry. Well, there is a bill before the Senate where they are drawing a connection between the implications of climate change on financial institutions and the impacts of financial institutions on climate change. So given all of this, given as well the competition that is there to obtain capital globally, how do you perceive the fact that in Canada, we really are behind in this area? Thank you for that question. In fact, that is a key question. In Europe today, this is an issue that is at the heart of all discussions. There is the principle of double materiality, which is currently being imposed on companies reporting, first the larger ones and then the less large companies. And this is the duality I spoke to, that is the impact of activities on climate and the impact of climate on activities and on financial performances of corporations and the portfolios behind them. That is key in my mind, because it really is true to that vision that we will be able to extricate ourselves from this single financial vision that rates the financial performance of a company. Certainly, a company needs to continue to perform. This has to be within the limits of what is possible. That is, one must be consistent with the pre-requirement. That is, we need to live in a functional biosphere. Otherwise, we can certainly produce products of value added. But if we only have 20 years left to live, it might not be in 20 years, but 200 years. But there again, we have to ask the question about how we can continue to evolve within the certain planetary limits. So in my mind, I think we need to posit that first as a prerequisite. So if we're the only ones to jump into a cold pool, and we look a little silly because the world does not want to do this, and that's what we're seeing in Europe as well. They seem to want to backtrack because when it comes to competitiveness, it is very difficult and complicated. So one has to be able to say, yes, but we're not talking about within 5 years, but perhaps in a century or further. And this might hurt now. Certainly there will be a cost to bear in the short term. But if we don't act, we will pay a far higher price in the long term. And if we have not absorbed this, it will almost be impossible. So as a result, today, those who can make some more radical decisions regarding their economies are those who think long term and who are not necessarily looking at market incentives. They don't simply have a quarterly view as to the effects that this has on their performance. So what are the risks that the financial system is incurring when it comes to international competitiveness? Now that we know France and the UK are imposing a tax, and I no longer remember what it's called, but there is a tax on imports of a number of products. So there is a risk regarding their global competitiveness if the Canadian economy doesn't move. Well, when it comes to European operators, if this system is entirely implemented and if it is robust and if to a certain extent it can do without those imports, that is, if that can be part of the competitiveness mechanism, that would be very good for Europe. But if Europe drives the markets regarding specific products, or if exports need Europe in order to continue operating, this will make it possible to put in place an incentive mechanism, and that is the European strategy, and is to set an example to ensure that this example be reproduced. However, if we're the only ones, if there are no alternatives, nothing will change. Ms. Collins, now we have to stop. Over to you, Ms. Collins.
Thank you. And Mr. Chenet, you had been talking a bit about how the financial system really hasn't been considering those externalities, hasn't been considering the devastating impact that the climate crisis is having on our society, but also on markets more generally, and will have in the future. We've seen many financial institutions in Canada turn away from their net zero commitments. Can you speak a little bit about why this has happened and how in jurisdictions with stronger financial regulations in this area, how financial institutions might have been or have not been able to meet climate targets?
Okay, thanks a lot, Mrs. Collins, for this question. It's actually, for me, the tipping point where we are in. So today we have financial institutions everywhere on Earth, in global financial markets at least, committing to net zero. It's easy to sign, easy to flag, but almost impossible to make. And when financial institutions realize that they have signed something which is probably too difficult for them, either they resign, so they are again compliant with their engagement, or they really have strong decisions to take. And as of today, as I was mentioning, it's very difficult for a global global financial institutions to say, okay, there is a market very profitable, for instance, oil and gas, and I decide not to go. This is very difficult. What is almost impossible to say, okay, I'm already there and I quit. And so I close down my branch working on that. I fire or I organize differently my employees. And this is a kind of it's not a win-win situation. So we are at a situation which finally is very interesting because we are not anymore in a situation where stakeholders are looking for a win-win option. So I think we are entering a win-lose, and we know that there will be a cost. We know that there will be something that will be closed. And so we have to organize this. And finally, it's much more, for me, a societal and a policy issue and a political issue than a pure financial thing. And when you have a bank really motivated, and I work with some of them who are very committed to try to go to this net zero, and when they realize what it means for them, behind the scenes, they say, okay, we will never succeed if there is not all the alignment of the economy to do that. And then it's not a financial stake anymore. It's first and foremost an industrial policy thing. If we take in Europe, for instance, the car industry, where the internal combustion engines are expected to be forbidden in 2035. It's in the law, but it can always go back and forth. It's easy for a financial decision maker to say, okay, I don't go to this company, I go to that because they are going electric. But if there is not such a regulation, they will not stop to finance car producers who make cheap combustion cars. It would be stupid. And so for me, the industrial policy has to be first and foremost, and then the financial industry to follow and implement.
And you've published on kind of this, the difference between push and pull, kind of incentive-based carrots versus more restricting policies. And your example that you just gave of industrial policy that would shift our economy and shift, ideally actually have a profound impact on emissions reduction. Can you kind of flesh out what other jurisdictions and how we might learn some lessons between that carrot and stick, push and pull dynamic?
Okay, yes. But clearly, even if it's a bit sketchy, but when you take a country or jurisdiction like China, where there is a kind of alignment between the governmental policies and a lot of the markets and the industry, it's relatively easy to not distinguish the two, and it may work because basically like central bank, for instance, but also the industries, the car producers, for instance, have to be aligned to a certain extent to the policy goal. And so it's relatively clear to orient the market in that direction. In Europe, for some things like car production, clearly there's a target that is set up by European Commission and European governments, and then market must follow. There is no much choices. But for other stuff, it's much less oriented. So there's a mix of this pull and push. And so we hope that all the signals are sufficiently aligned so that financial markets would make the good decisions and align the market with the goal. But it may not work. So it depends.
And do you find, especially in kind of peer countries, in democratic countries, are there examples of this kind of industrial policy that's really having an impact on the financial institutions and on emissions reductions more broadly?
Just on top of my head, I don't have a very concrete example, but maybe to couple with your previous question. In Japan, for instance, the central bank is providing support to green banking activities, but it's very much on a voluntary basis. So you have a mix of very centralized policy and even monetary policy decision, but quite open in terms of the way it's done because there is no strict rule on this is green, this is not green.
Thank you very much. We'll have to stop there. We'll go to our second round. It'll be a 3-minute round, 3 minutes and 1.5 minutes, so that we can finish this first panel at noon. Mr. Deltel for 3 minutes, please.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Merci à la qualité de nos
Chair,
invités.
and thank you for the caliber of our witnesses today. Mr. Chenet, I'd have a question for you. How can a company honestly and fairly calculate its net zero? Thank you, Mr. Deltel. Well, what it can well calculate is its carbon footprint, what it emits. If we're speaking about net zero, this would be a forecast for the future, as we just discussed with Ms. McGuire. So we have to look at what we will be emitting, and that will span over a number of years, as well as perhaps decades. So it all depends on the choices we make as a company, but it also depends on societal choices, the kinds of consumer demand there is, and the products or goods that we're producing, but as well it depends on the services we use. If we look at that, we're very much dependent on the outside. It is very complicated to estimate accurately and to be robust. We will always be robust to the extent that. But given today's activities, if a company today says that it has achieved net zero or that it wants to achieve net zero, what must it do? You're saying yourself that it's difficult to calculate. So can a company proudly, or how can a CEO proudly indicate that, yes, they're at net zero? The quick answer is that it's impossible. The more complex answer is to say that if I were to take this global scenario that plays out, that if I lower the emissions by so much between countries and between corporations, that I take this portion of the world emissions, of carbon emissions, and that's one thing. That's a carbon budget. And how do I spend that carbon budget? That would be a very tangible, concrete strategy. This is why I invest in. These are the activities I start up, what I stop, how do I adjust my processes, what kind of new technologies will I apply, which do I stop using. And there we can see something more sound. But again, this would be something that would have to be applied globally. If all the world companies did this, but if they do not agree, you might have you have very few companies that are at net zero and will end up with 4 degrees. In Canada, we do have somebody, Mr. Marconi, who is world-renowned. He is currently as an advisor in the cabinet of the Prime Minister, but he did avow that he said that his company was at net zero, but he backtracked on that. So what do you think about these leaders who say one thing to look like they are doing the environmentally right thing, but in fact that is not at all true? Very quickly, Professor Chenet, to be simple, on the one hand, it is important to foster a certain volunteerism to allow people to commit, to be engaged, and that is essential in democracy, that there be observers who say, yes, you're committed, now we're going to check whether or not you're delivering. Thank you.
Madame Châtel.
Ms. Châtel. Thank you very much, Chair. First of all, I'd like to welcome all of our witnesses for being with us today. Mr. Chenet, I'd be interested in hearing your view on world competitiveness compared to a green economy or a transition economy. I was looking at the numbers that Bloomberg gave us, according to which global investments in transition economies will or have achieved in 2023 a record of $1.67 trillion. So that's a 17% increase compared to the previous year. This amount is in renewable energies, in electrified transportation, hydrogen, as well as carbon capture technologies. This is an international competition. And would you say the same thing about the financial markets? Is there true competition to attract these types of investments in the different countries? Thank you, Ms. Châtel. I have the sense that the green aspect is becoming attractive and that it's working quite well, to the extent that financial institutions now will no longer speak about the electrical light bulbs, but they speak about the green parts of their portfolios. So I think that there's this competitive dynamic and there's marketing that is all part of the game, and these are working quite well. However, this has to be put into parallel compared to what is harmful and what is still dominating. And I think that's much easier to highlight because it's very well to have a world full of wind farms and very possibly clean energy, but we're still producing 4 degrees and we're still using fossil fuel, but there is simply more energy available. Now, to remain competitive, the Canadian economy has to focus on a number of policies. First of all, to continue aiming for net zero in its economy. That's one fact. And also to provide the opportunities to invest in renewable energies. We also have the green bonds that we've launched. We also have carbon pricing that helps us to decarbonize our economy. So as far as you're concerned, are we on the right track in order to attract this kind of foreign investments? Very briefly, please, Professor. In a few words, that is not a subject that I'm an expert on. However, generally, if you have faith in the fact that you want to limit climate change, and this can only become more and more important. So in fact, we have no other choice. We have to put everything in there. It doesn't mean that if it fails, we will simply abandon. Unfortunately, we have to stop there. Ms. Posé.
Exactly.
2.5 minutes? Yes. Mr. Chenet, I have some more questions for you. Financial institutions have committed to achieve voluntarily net zero. They say we're going to do this voluntarily. However, is that the same thing as having mechanisms in order to compel them to achieve net zero? To my knowledge, all of these commitments are voluntary. I'm not aware of any jurisdictions where financial institutions are obligated to achieve net zero. And perhaps what I do have in mind is that this is mostly voluntary when it comes to these institutions. However, when it becomes binding is when an institution voluntarily commits to honoring a certain target. They may be declared with the stakeholders of having committed to this, and they have to then follow through. But possibly European legislation might eventually compel those who work with them to achieve those same objectives. Do I have a few seconds left? Perhaps a statement? I just want Mr. Chenet to explain to us why it is that banks are underestimating climate risks. Well, I believe that they underestimate this because they're trying to calculate them in specific numbers on a specific time horizon, which is not possible. Ms. Collins.
Thanks so much, Mr. Chenet. Yeah, I feel like the financial institutions, but also governments, are looking at too short of time horizons when it comes to the impacts of the climate crisis. One of the other things that concerns me is that we've heard that there is quite a bit of overlap between the boards of these financial organizations, institutions, and the fossil fuel boards of the largest fossil fuel companies in Canada. These oil and gas companies are also underreporting their emissions drastically. While a number of those companies are also investing in emissions reduction technologies, they're also growing oil and gas mining and exploration, increasing their emissions. Do you think there are ways that we can address the issues of emissions underreporting through some of the climate-aligned financial regulations that we've been talking about?
Thank you for your question, Mrs. Collins. I think how to answer this quickly. In Europe, typically, we have seen for the last 10 years the expectation on reporting related to these items, like carbon emissions, to be more and more precise under some standards, and now they will be audited. And so I think it will become more and more difficult to cheat or to provide wrong numbers. So I guess the question is audit. Thank
you. Mr. Leslie, for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Tingle, I'd like to pick up where you left off talking about the SEC using fines for fraudulent claims or greenwashing. And we've seen this here in Canada with Liberal advisor Mark Carney when he admitted that Brookfield had, we'll call it overstated, that their trillion-dollar enterprise is in fact across at net zero, and certainly had to walk that statement back. But in Canada, what body would actually investigate false claims like that currently?
The securities commissions.
So in Canada, it's the same sort of thing. Have we seen any activities like that undertaken? Any fines you're aware of?
No, and that's characteristic of a less active enforcement regime generally in Canada compared to the United States, which tends to be much more aggressive.
Do you think greenwashing and making these sorts of claims for a company like Mark Carney did should be investigated more in Canada?
Yeah, I mean, the truth is these are sophisticated entities, these investment funds, and they should be obliged to tell the truth the way every other actor in our capital markets is. We haven't particularly looked into this sort of thing, but there's no principled reason why they shouldn't.
It seems to me that we should, I suppose, remain skeptical when we have major companies like that making these sorts of claims. And, through your opening remarks, you certainly made it clear that, in your view, these disclosures don't improve outcomes, and the scientific studies or academic studies back that up. Is there any way that you think imposing these sorts of ESG disclosures will actually help Canada meet any of its climate obligations?
No, because I think the corporate governance channel is too weak to actually produce meaningful change. The truth is, companies are, including financial institutions, are embedded in competitive markets. Those markets really constrain their behavior, and they're not in a position to take low or lower return make lower return investments in the alternatives, which is what we ask them to do if we ask them to voluntarily.
And so you're talking really about our pension funds. It's putting our pension funds at risk.
I'm talking about every institutional investor. They're all subject to the same pressures to improve relative performance compared to each other. And so energy and time they put into improving the outcomes in one company will sort of raise the value of the index they're being marked against. So they just tend not to be involved in for specific governance of any kind. ESG is not unusual in this respect. They just don't do it. And when we look at the way they do ESG investing, we see a similar sort of lack of attention. They tend to be more focused on picking stocks and trading them.
Thank you. Mr. Van Koerden.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. Thanks to our witnesses for being here. You know, we spent much of our time and effort litigating the virtues of ESG investing, and for those watching, that's the environmental, social, and the governance standards that big companies can claim to attract attention and investment. And unfortunately, I think we're kind of missing the point a little bit, as the politicization of ESG investing in the United States led to a very polarizing series of headlines. I'll read one from the New York Times. How environmentally conscious investing became a target of conservatives. The business world has been pulled into partisan politics, with Republicans bringing their battle against socially conscious investing to Congress. For over 2 years, there was this conversation in the United States as to whether or not ESG investing was worthwhile. It was my hope that we could avoid that here on this committee, mostly because this study isn't supposed to be on whether or not ESG standards are worthwhile, but rather to what degree companies need to be honest if they're going to say that they have renewed commitments on environmentally sound practices or a new governance practice that ought to be seen as more ethical is honest and true. And that's what that disclosure is going to report on. Monsieur Chenet, am I mistaken? Are we discussing, is a sustainable finance disclosure and taxonomy more about honesty or litigating whether or not companies ought to be sustainable?
Thank you, Mr. Van Koerden. I think it's about everything. The taxonomy is good, is just a translation of a policy goal that is not in the policy for me. So it's better than nothing. It would be clearer to have an industrial policy. And disclosure is just to transparency and honesty to try to make the markets more efficient. The question for me is that we cannot just rely only on markets. That's why regulation and plans for the economy, where do we want to go, is important to give the signal so that the investors can take good decisions.
Thank you, Mr. Chenet. And Mr. Tingle, you've pointed out that ESG has been proven not to necessarily improve standards. Are you hopeful that improved disclosure standards would improve outcomes in about 20 seconds, if you could?
Sure. No, the problem isn't so much that the disclosure is bad. The problem is the incentives are bad, and the freedom of companies to behave differently doesn't exist. They have to maximize. So I agree completely with Professor Chenet in his last remarks.
Thank you very much to both of you. And Mr. Chair, if I could, with my remaining time, I've already tabled my pre-committee study, pre-study bill for Bill C-73, and I'd like to retable that and hopefully vote on it quickly so that we can get the minister here. I would just say that over the last couple of meetings, the Conservative members have indicated their desire to have the minister come to committee, and I'm hopeful that he can come Wednesday if we can pass this motion.
Okay, I want to thank the witnesses. You're free to go. We have a little bit of committee business, but thank you for contributing to the discussion.
Merci beaucoup.
Have the motion in front of us? Or?
Everybody should have the motion before them. I've tabled it twice, actually, and I've moved the motion at a previous meeting.
Okay,
but I can read it again if you'd like. It's the motion on for this committee to undertake a pre-study on Bill C-73, an act respecting transparency and accountability in relation to certain commitments Canada has made under the Convention on Biological Diversity. And to this end, the committee hold a minimum of 5 meetings, where A, we invite the Minister of Environment and Climate Change and officials, and secondly, that the study begin within 7 days of the adoption of this motion. Perhaps, I think there were previously stated amendments, and I entertain those now so we can vote on them and get to our second panel.
Yeah, we have the original motion, and Madame Posé, I believe, has an amendment. Madame Posé, voulez-vous nous lire? Okay, just. Okay, we have to have a vote as to whether we want to resume debate as dilatory. So let's just vote on whether we want to rediscuss this motion. Apparently, we have to. The faster we do it, the better. So we have to have a vote on whether we want to rediscuss the motion. Then we can go to Madame Posé's amendment.
OK. C'était pour un amendement, M.
Oui,
donc c'est pas là. Okay, donc, je prends pas
it
la
was for an
parole.
amendment. First of all, we need to agree to review the additional motion. If the answer is yes, then we will move on to your amendment.
Mr. Ali?
In favor?
Madame Chatel?
We oppose.
Mr. Longfield?
Yes.
Ms. Taylor-Roy?
Yes.
Mr. Van Couverden?
Yes.
Monsieur Dadtel?
No.
Mr. Leslie? Mr. Mazer?
No.
Ms. Lewis?
No.
Madame Posey?
Oui.
Ms. Collins?
Yes.
Okay, so
Mr. Chair, just really briefly.
Pardon me?
Oh, it's okay. I can do it later.
Yes, Ms. Taylor-Roy.
I have an amendment to make after Madame Posé.
Okay, Madame Posé, pourriez-vous nous lire votre amendement? C'est pas très compliqué.
Could you read your amendment? It's not very complicated, so I'm encouraging the committee to proceed with this quickly. Ms. Posé, it's just that I heard that the minister was available on Wednesday, so to invite the officials from the Department of Environment and Climate Change Canada to appear before the committee on November 6th for 1 hour. I do believe that is the minister who's responsible. Yes, I have been informed that the minister is available for the second hour on Wednesday. So what I intend to do is to have a last panel during the first hour of Wednesday's meeting. That would be to conclude the finance study and then to hear the minister for the second hour to launch the study on Bill C-73. So what is Ms. Posé doing simply is approve that idea, and I do believe that is what you're looking to do, that the minister come on the 6th. I think by agreement, we seem to be in agreement with this, so we don't need a vote for that. Very well.
J'ai Monsieur Leslie, Madame Collins.
Mr. Leslie, Ms. Collins, then Ms. Taylor-Roy.
Oui, Mr. Leslie, go ahead. Okay. We may have to just, anyway, go ahead.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Just maybe first, if I could get some clarification on what, did we actually make an amendment just now? Yeah. What does it say now?
Well, it just says that, it says that, I'll read it in English, that this study begin, the way B will read after the amendment is as follows, that this study begin following the completion of the witness testimony of the study on environment and climate impacts related to the Canadian financial system. So basically, Madame Posé wants to finish this study before having the minister here or before beginning the study, the pre-study on C-73. Now, it so happens that we only have 1 hour left after today on the finance study. So that's what we'll do Wednesday in the first hour. And in the second hour, the minister's free, so he'll come and launch the pre-study on C-73. So it all falls into place.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Okay, and maybe not. Okay, Madam Collins.
Just, I was not clear that we were voting on an amendment when you were discussing the kind of timing. I didn't have the language in front of me, and I'm hoping that we can at least go back to that because I would have proposed an amendment to the amendment.
Okay, now, well, we did pass the amendment. If you want to propose an amendment to the amendment, but I think Madam Taylor-Roy is going to...
I guess I'm just curious if is it because I'm virtual or were other people in the room a little bit confused about the fact that we were voting on an amendment?
No.
That was not clear to me.
No, I said are we in favor of the amendment? And everybody, well, the Conservatives didn't, but the Liberals nodded their head. Madame Posey nodded her head. I mean, I'm sorry.
I have my hand up, and usually...
I'm sorry, I didn't see that. But I mean... I thought it was circulated, the text of the amendment?
I don't have the text.
Okay, can we circulate the text of the amendment? Okay, so then I guess we'll go back to, we're going to roll back a little bit. We're going to talk about the Madame Posey's amendment. I've got, just a second, I've got Mr. Leslie, was it on Madame Posey's amendment?
All of it. Oh, we got,
pardon?
Whenever I can go, I'll go.
Okay, so what we're going to do...
Just a quick point of order, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Just first, happy birthday, Mr. Leslie.
Oh, thank you.
And I also just want to say that at the beginning of two...
Go ahead.
You didn't adjourn, did you?
No, I'm just... No. I'm
happy
tempted.
birthday.
I'm tempted.
So I just want to say that at the beginning of the last two meetings, the Conservatives made a point of order off the hop to ask when ministers were coming. On Wednesday, we can have a minister come. And that's what the amendment states. We can have the Minister of the Environment and Climate Change come on Wednesday. So I thought you'd be thrilled. Yeah.
Oh, come on. Back. Okay. So, Mr. Leslie, what do you have to say about this?
Okay, so I think I understand the amended version. I think that is reasonable in general to get the minister, and I'm glad we could finally finish Ms. Posey's study. Part of why this is so complicating is because we have a tremendous amount of work that has been undertaken and is currently being undertaken by this committee, including having Minister Boissonnault appear to conclude.
I have on that. I have some news on that. Okay. Mr. Boissonnault is available. He's going to come if we want on December 4th.
So a month from now.
Yeah. So he's coming. So that's settled.
Okay. And is that confirmed? Like, do we have
that's confirmed as I think it can be. Yeah. Yeah. We have something in writing from him. Yeah.
Okay.
Sure. Are you still, we were at you, do you still have more to say on this?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Then we'll go to Ms. Collins, Ms. Taylor-Roy, Mr. Mazer.
So,
on the amendment.
So we are still on the amended version or the amendment?
The amendment, Madame Posey's amendment. You said you wanted to speak on whatever was on the floor.
Okay, so we have not voted on the amendment yet.
No, well, we did, but Ms. Collins raised an objection, and I'll you know, I understand that it's difficult when you're remote, so I'm going back to the you know, I'm going backwards so that we go back to where we were voting on the amendment.
Oh, okay, sure. I will just say, you know, I appreciate the kind words from Mr. Vancouverton for my birthday, but I wish we weren't, we would have reserved this topic for committee business, where it's always pointed out to us where it's a more appropriate time, and we are unfortunately, I think, going to have to lose the officials that have traveled all the way across the river to get here, and I think that is deeply unfortunate to see that sort of hypocrisy. But why I think this is all very confusing, not only in the case of what amendment we're voting on, is because this committee has so many things on its plate right now, juggling. Obviously, Mr. Chair, you worked tirelessly, I think, for years to bring forward a very robust water study that I'm sure the analysts have been working very diligently on, which I know had a lot of witnesses, a lot of testimony to bring together, so I'm sure there's a lot of work there. But I suspect you would like to see that that study see the light of day in a published format, and with rumors of possible prorogation, potential early carbon tax election. I would hate to see that report not make it across the necessary finish line to be published. Of course, this isn't the only thing we have, and I appreciate a possible date of December 4th, I believe it was, you said, for Minister Randy Boissonnault to appear to help us conclude the Jasper fire investigation, which I hope he's spending a lot of time in Jasper talking to folks there to find out, as we have studied, the factors that led into the devastating fire that devastated that community and left 2,000 people homeless. And I think we really need to try to also ensure that we finalize that particular topic. We have ongoing, I think, letters that need to be sent out regarding the appearance by the 5 oil and gas CEOs before our committee. And I think we have another study or two awaiting circulation for us to review. Then, of course, there's the Net Zero Accelerator Fund challenges that we are having. My understanding, obviously, we haven't returned to that issue.
So if I could interrupt, we're going to be discussing that on the 18th of November.
Okay.
Yeah, so regardless of this motion, whether it passes or not, on the 18th, we're going to do we're going to look at the Net Zero Accelerator.
Okay. That is good to hear. I suspect we'll also be looking at the Environment Commissioner's report. They're anticipated.
Point of order. So did the Deputy Minister what did we end up with that?
So we're going to have a delegate of the Deputy Minister. The Deputy Minister is not here. We talked about that. So,
and they can answer the questions about how many emissions are actually targeted. All the answers that the Deputy Minister refused to answer the first time.
The Deputy Minister is seconding his, I'm not sure of the individual's title, but yes, there will be somebody there standing in for the Deputy Minister. Yeah, but yes, actually, I was going to bring that up. I'm glad you brought it up, Mr. Leslie. Does the committee wish to receive the receive the commissioner on the 20th? Is everyone? I'm seeing nodding on the right side. Madam Collins, would you like to see the commissioner on the 20th? What about on the left side here? Okay, so we're going to invite the commissioner on the 20th. So I've dealt with those two things. Minister Boissonnault coming on the 4th of December. The commissioner on the 20th. Go ahead, Mr. Leslie.
Perhaps we should, maybe this is committee business. It certainly sounds like that as we're on the fly hashing these details out. So again, it's odd that we're doing this in public with witnesses in the room, but that was the prerogative of the member raising the issue. We have, I think, another study raised by my colleague from the NDP on a challenging issue regarding Fort Chippewa and a dock.
Yes, we're waiting to hear back from the Transport Committee. I'm hoping tomorrow.
We have many things on the go
Point
in
of
this
order,
committee
Mr.
right now, and I think
Yes,
we are.
Ms. Collins has a point of order.
Okay.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Mr. Leslie. I just want to clarify that our motion was very explicit that if we didn't hear back from the Transport Committee within a week with an affirmative, that we would proceed. We would proceed as if we're having the study. So I think at this point, Mr. Chair, the committee has directed you to proceed as if we are conducting the study on the contamination in Fort Chippewa.
Okay, let me have a little pause and check with the clerk on that. There was a deadline of the 28th, and I'll report back on that at some point. But right now, we're back on Mr. Leslie debating the amendment.
And if I could, we're all finding out together.
Point of order?
Yes.
I'm sorry. I just don't understand. If in fact we're debating the amendment, I don't understand the relevance of what Mr. Leslie is saying to the amendment.
Yeah, right Mr. Now. Leslie, can you focus on the amendment?
The amendment?
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Could I add my name to the list on the main motion? And I will pick up on these many important points at that point, but I will make one.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
Yes, Mr. Vancouver.
My colleague pointed out that we have witnesses in the room, and they've already said that they're in favor of the motion. We could vote, and we could finish the meeting, and we could hear testimony.
I have a speaking list, unfortunately, and I have to go through it. My hands are tied. So we'll put Mr. Leslie on the list for the
Je vais faire un petit rappel au règlement, moi aussi.
Oui, Madame.
Point of order. Now, I don't know how much time we are wasting right now so that the Minister of the Environment appear before the committee for an hour. He will come in any case. So there's really no reason for the amendment because in any case he is coming. So, Mr. Leslie has repeated this several times. We have the witnesses here, and now we are postponing this. That is, we will not finish on Wednesday with all of the time that we're wasting right now. That is up to the committee to decide. Well, you're correct.
Mais écoutez, j'ai Madame. Écoutez, je vais passer. Le problème, c'est que si on n'adopte pas cette motion-là,
if we do not adopt the motion, the minister will not come. So we invite the minister to come. It is due to the motion that we'll be inviting the minister to appear.
Si on n'adopte pas cette motion,
so if we do not pass this motion, everything will be up in the air for Wednesday. So we do not know when we will be able to invite the minister. So what I would suggest...
Can I see the original motion? Unamended. Écoutez, moi ce que je suggère, là, si on veut vraiment...
I would suggest the following. If we really want to deal with this issue.
C'est déjà dans le compte rendu de la réunion que le ministre est prêt à venir sur C73.
We already saw that in the meeting minutes that the minister prepared to come on Wednesday, and we all seem to be in agreement. So if we withdraw the amendment and we adopt the motion,
Ça va nous donner le résultat qu'on veut.
Exactement.
It will give us the result we're looking to obtain. Yes, so I withdraw my amendment. Aren't we continuously saying, especially from the conservative members, that they always want to see the minister here? Now he's prepared to come, and now we're wasting our time. So if we withdraw the amendment, we come back to the original motion.
Ms. Collins, do you want to speak on the original motion? But you were on the amendment or the...
I was hoping.
Were you on the amendment or the original motion?
I have another amendment to both put forward.
Okay. Well, okay. Okay, just a second. I had Ms. Collins. Ms. Collins, what did you want to talk about?
I was hoping to speak on both the amendment and to the main motion.
Well, the amendment's gone, so we'll put you on the list for the original motion. Then, Ms. Taylor-Roy, you want to speak to the original motion and propose an amendment. Mr. Mazier, do you want to speak? You want to speak on something? Sure. Okay, on the original motion. Okay. Yes, Mr. Leslie. Actually, we're going back to you because we're on the original motion. You're next. An amendment to Madame Posé's amendment?
To speak, and so I was making a motion, an amendment to the main motion.
You were on the list, but I thought you wanted to speak to the amendment.
No, I said I had another.
Okay, go ahead, and we'll go to Mr. Leslie.
Thank you. The simple amendment.
No, you see, he was talking about the sub-amendment. And we're done with the sub-amendment. We're going to get back to Mr. Leslie after Ms. Taylor-Roy. Ms. Taylor-Roy.
I think that's not correct.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to suggest that in point
Just
B.
a second, Ms. Taylor-Roy. Mr. Mazier has a point of order.
Can you please clarify with Mr. Leslie? Because I'm sure.
Yes, Mr. Leslie is going to speak to the motion.
Can you please just ask him?
It's okay.
No, Ms. Taylor-Roy wanted to speak on the main motion. Then later on, Mr. Leslie, who was speaking on the amendment, said, well, I also want to speak on the main motion. So I'm putting him after Ms. Taylor-Roy.
Can I just point of order, question of clarity first, though, not about the speaking list. Given that we are at 1:30, more or less, and we're going to run into resources, does this hour with officials that has not happened count towards the count of Ms. Posé?
No, it doesn't. We're going to have to have another hour added on somewhere in this study. Pardon?
Sorry, the clock says 1:30. It hasn't been changed yet.
No, but this second panel there, I think.
We're not voting, bud. So Madame Posé's study will be further delayed.
There'll be basically an hour left after Wednesday. There'll be an hour left on Madame Posé's study.
With officials, because it'll be their first time appearing on that study.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Just looking for clarity, because this is point of business now.
But that's where we're headed. So Ms. Taylor-Roy and then Mr. Leslie.
Thank you. The sub-amendment I'd like to make is...
It's an amendment because...
Yes, amendment. If Madame Posé has withdrawn hers, then in point B, I'd like to amend it to say that the study begin the first meeting following the adoption of this motion. Because if the minister is here next week to talk about this issue, we need to start this study on Wednesday. So my amendment just says that the study began the first meeting following the adoption of this motion.
That's what we were intending to do anyway. So we can make that amendment.
I just want to be clear that that's what we're doing.
How do we feel about the Madame Taylor-Roy's amendment? This is what we're going to do anyway. So do we need to have a vote? We agree?
Mr. Chair.
On division?
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Mr. Chair.
You want to speak to Ms. Taylor-Roy's amendment?
I do.
Okay. Go ahead.
Mr. Chair, I think what I'd like to do a sub-amendment, I guess. And the intention behind it, and just because I've only heard Madame Taylor-Roy's amendment verbally, but the intention behind my sub-amendment would be to say that we start the first session of this study on Wednesday, and then we schedule the rest of the timing of the rest of the pre-study be determined at the next subcommittee meeting. That way, we do not have to spend in the next hour debating what is happening. My big concern is that we push the contamination in Fort Chipewyan, the study on contamination in Fort Chipewyan, back even further. And so I would really love it if we could maybe come behind the idea of having this one session of this pre-study start on Wednesday when we have the minister here, and then we can determine the timing of the rest of the pre-study at the next subcommittee meeting.
Okay, but what I think, though, already the 18th is spoken for. The 20th is spoken for. The committee's agreed that the 18th we do net zero accelerator. The 20th we have the commissioner. What's the meeting after the 20th? Well, I would suggest that after we should finish this 1 hour that's left on the finance study. We should do that on the. Sorry, just a second. We should do that on the 25th. Maybe we can do an hour of committee business after that on the 25th, because scheduling a subcommittee meeting basically kills an hour of kills a committee meeting, because we have to use the same slot essentially. So what I would suggest, which I think would respond to your wishes, is on the 25th. The 25th, we have the officials back if they're available from ECCC and finance. We have them back for the hour that they can't do today. And then in the second hour of that meeting, we can do committee business in camera.
Mr. Chair, could we tack on an extra hour to one of our meetings? That way we won't lose an hour.
Hang on. Can we just even...
That's what I'm proposing. Can we vote on this? That's what we do?
Yes.
I guess, Mr. Chair,
I want to talk to her, but
I think that we had a amendment, and then I just did a sub-amendment. Are you proposing a amendment?
Well, are there any more speakers? Are you speaking? Any more speakers? Okay, go ahead.
So if I understand...
So I will let the witnesses go. We'll be back in touch with an alternative date. Thank you.
So if I understand, Ms. Collins, all you were talking about is bringing the minister in for 1 hour this Wednesday, and then that way we haven't lost the slot, we haven't lost the meeting opportunity to talk to the minister, and then we decide what we're going to do after that at continue as usual. I think that was a very reasonable approach, and I would support.
No, that's not exactly what she was saying. She was saying that
she was nodding her head the whole time.
No, but okay, can I clarify? Basically, just a second. Basically, Ms. Collins was saying, let's go ahead with 1 hour of the finance study on Wednesday, followed by the minister on C-73, and then we would hold a subcommittee meeting to discuss the timing of Ms. Collins' study. What I'm saying is, if we do that,
Mr. Chair,
I think the issue of Wednesday is settled. I think the issue of Wednesday is settled. We're all in agreement. I don't know why we're debating Wednesday. So, but I think what we're debating now is, do we have a subcommittee meeting in lieu of one of our regular meetings? And that subcommittee meeting would not be able to be held until the 25th of November. So, because we've already agreed on what we're doing the 18th and the 20th. So what I'm suggesting is on the 25th, we could finish that 1 hour we have left on the finance study with the witnesses that we had to let go, and we could then go in camera for the second hour and do committee business and talk about Ms. Collins' study. And if you want to make that a 2 hour committee business meeting, then we can do that as well. But that takes us up to 2 o'clock on a Monday. But we could do that. We may get committee business done in half an hour. It may all be moot in the end. So that's the issue we're talking about, is whether we have a subcommittee meeting on say the 25th of November, or we have our witnesses back for 1 hour and do 1 hour of future business in camera on the 25th. So that's what we're at. So Ms. Collins, what are you suggesting?
Just a point of clarification. My amendment, sub-amendment to the amendment was that we determine the timing of this pre-study on C-73 at the next subcommittee meeting. It wasn't determining when that subcommittee meeting would be. I would actually suggest that we don't have it in lieu of one of our public meeting times, that we add an extra hour on to one of our sessions, or have it on another day. But I would leave that to the discretion of the chair, but that really we we have the minister come on the Wednesday. As you said, everyone's in
That
agreement
launches
with
the
that.
study on, that launches the pre-study.
I guess my sub-amendment is proposing that we build into this motion that the rest of the study, it launches for one day, and then the rest of the study will determine at the next subcommittee meeting, as we normally would do with any of these things, as the Liberals could have done at the last subcommittee meeting.
Do we have Ms. Taylor-Roy's motion in writing, a sub-amendment in writing? Can we get that? Yes.
Sure, I can give it to you.
Could we have all of it circulated to us in writing?
Well, we have the original motion.
No, I understand that. Well,
yeah. So Ms. Taylor-Roy is going to send us her amendment to the original motion.
And then we need Ms. Collins's too.
Pardon? And then Ms. Collins, we'll debate. Yeah, then we'll have Ms. Collins. Once we get Ms. Taylor-Roy's amendment, Ms. Collins will have to write a sub-amendment. So, well, let's just pause for a few minutes. Thank you. on your screens, you have Ms. Taylor-Roy's amendment. So the amendment basically changes the B, Article B of the motion to read that this study begin the first meeting following the adoption of this motion. Ms. Taylor-Roy, do you have any more thing to say about that?
Yes, just that when it was sent over, there was an S added to that this study begin the first meeting.
Yeah, that's a typo.
It should be meeting.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
That's it? Okay, Ms. Collins. Do you have a sub-amendment for this?
I do. So in B, that it read that the first hour of this study, so the added words are the 4 words, the first hour of, between that and this. So that the first hour of this study begin the first meeting following the adoption of this motion, comma, and then my...
Could you go a little slower?
For sure.
Oh, okay. So can I see what you're sending?
Sure.
Okay, so we're going to send this around electronically so that we can all see it. Okay, so has it come through?
Got it yet.
It should be coming any minute. Okay. Has everyone received it?
It hasn't been that. I'm waiting for edits. Apparently there's
Oh, there's an edit. Okay, there's an edit, so it'll take a few extra minutes.
Okay, maybe I'll quickly reply to the whole.
Is that the edited version? That's the original amendment. What's the edit?
What's the edit?
And that the timing of the remaining meetings be determined. So that's not the most recent that has to be edited? Yeah, let's just pause for a second. Collins? C'est en bas de la page, je pense. Ça devrait être là.
It should be at the bottom of the page.
It's also plural. The meetings is in plural in French, so that will have to change in Zoom.
Yeah, l'alinéa B.
So, under B,
tel que proposé par Madame Collins.
As put forward by Ms. Collins, in English, it reads as follows.
The first hour of this study begin the first meeting following the adoption of this motion, comma, and the timing of the remaining meetings of this pre-study be determined at the next subcommittee meeting. In French, it would be as follows, que la première heure de cette étude commence.
That the first hour of the study begin the first meetings following of the adoption of this motion, and the timing of the remaining meetings of this pre-study be determined at the next subcommittee meeting.
On écrit de la sous-commission, mais c'est du
So
comité
it says
directeur.
subcommittee, but regardless,
Ça veut dire plus ou moins la même chose. Alors,
it's more or less the same thing. So I think we understand.
So, Ms. Collins, would you like to speak to this?
Yeah, I think in general, I want to, just highlight maybe just starting first, realizing that my my sub-amendment had the typo from the original amendment. So just to edit out meetings and put it as the singular. But to speaking to the amendment itself, I think the importance of doing a pre-study on Bill C-73 is like it is a really important bill that we want to tackle that is important when we're thinking about biodiversity and accountability. And we want to make sure that we have the minister come this Wednesday, which everyone's in agreement with. But because this is clearly a conversation that's going to take a little while, that normally we would schedule another study in the list of studies that we need to do at a subcommittee meeting, we wouldn't take up witness time. This is a way for us to make sure that conversation can happen. For me, my big priority is to make sure that we honor the wishes of the nations who have asked Parliament to look at the contamination in Fort Chipewyan. I want to make sure that the remaining meetings of this pre-study don't displace that and allow the current government to avoid accountability on the contamination and the lack of transparency and communication to those nations in Fort Chipewyan. I also want to make sure that we get to this pre-study on Bill C-73. It is critical. And so I'm hoping that this is a way that we can have the whole committee come together, pass this motion today, and then move on with the business at hand.
Okay, anyone else to speak on the amendment? Mr. Leslie.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I think it is a reasonable amendment from my colleague that I hope we could find a solution to further amending it, I think, to deal with, as I mentioned earlier, the many issues that are pressing to this committee and the work that has been undertaken so that we do not have this study push back our agenda until more or less the spring, and we may risk losing all of the reports and all of the work. I even forgot earlier about the caribou study and the letter that we'll be sending there. So we have a lot of things on the table, and in order to try to help clean up that, as well as you outline some of the more recent news we've received about the Environment Commissioner meeting being tentatively scheduled, an apparent appearance from Minister Boissonnault, but I would like to clarify that we do have Minister Boissonnault come here, and I'd like to sub-amend the amendment by adding after the adoption of this motion, comma, but none shall commence until the committee has heard from Minister Boissonnault in relation to the study of the factors leading to the recent fires in Jasper National Park, which I think is...
Could you, when you say none, what are you referring to?
So, in the amendment...
Point of order, Mr. Chair?
Yes, Ms. Collins, is it really a point of order?
Yeah, it is. It's just that we have an amendment from Ms. Taylor-Roy and that my amendment is a sub-amendment to that amendment. And I don't think procedurally we're allowed to have a sub-amendment to a sub-amendment. I'm very much interested in hearing what Mr. Leslie has to say, but I think we might have to deal with this sub-amendment before we move on to another.
That's a good question. Let me clarify. We're going to pause while we double check that. Thank you. Ms. Collins, thank you. You were right on this. You're right on this. So we're going to have to deal with the Ms. Taylor-Roy sub-amendment first, and we have Mr. Leslie. We can't. Yeah, but yes, that's right. But that's right. We have to deal with her sub-amendment. But Mr. Leslie wants to speak to that sub-amendment. He's not proposing something now. He can't do that right now. So, but he still wants to speak to Ms. Collins's amendment.
No,
You said you wanted to speak.
I did, but it was to move the sub-amendment, so we're not allowed.
We're not doing that now.
So I can't.
Okay.
But so I will. I don't know if my colleagues have anything to add on this specific amendment.
But we're going to have to deal with this. So can we vote on Ms. Collins's amendment? I have no one else to speak to this.
We support. We're okay with it.
Okay, go ahead. Can we do this vote? Can we do the vote? Well, I don't know. Let's have a vote. Yeah. On Ms. Collins's amendment, which we just read before, and the timing of the remaining meetings of this pre-study be determined at the next subcommittee meeting. That's what we're voting on.
Mr. Ali? Madame Chatel?
Point de clarification, on vote sur quoi là en ce moment?
Sur l'amendement de Madame Collins.
Clarification. What are we voting on? On Ms. Collins' amendment.
Et que le calendrier des autres réunions
that the schedule for the further meetings of this pre-study be established during the next meeting of the committee.
Mr. Longfield? Ms. Taylor-Roy?
Oui.
Mr. Vancouverden?
Yes.
Mr. Dattel?
Oui.
Mr. Leslie? Yes. Mr. Mazur?
Yes.
Ms. Lewis?
Yes.
Madame Posey?
Oui.
Ms. Collins?
Okay, so it passes. So we go back to the original motion as amended, and I had a list there. I had Mr. Leslie, Ms. Collins, Ms. Taylor-Roy, Mr. Mazur. That's on the main motion as amended. Mr. Leslie?
Point of order. We just voted on the sub-amendment, didn't we?
Yeah.
Don't we have to vote on the amendment now?
There's no sub-amendment. We know that it's an amendment. We weren't allowed to do a sub-amendment.
No, but look, Ms. Collins had a sub-amendment to my amendment. We voted on the sub-amendment. We haven't voted on the amendment yet.
You're right. Sorry, I apologize, Ms. Taylor-Roy. Can we vote on
Could we ask for unanimous consent if there's...
Wait a second. We're now we have Ms. Taylor-Roy's amendment has been amended, so we're voting on Ms. Taylor-Roy's amendment. Oh, well, you're right. We're speaking on it. Okay. So who wants to speak on it? Mr. Mazur, Mr. Leslie, Mr. Mazur. Mr. Deltel? Ms. Collins? Okay, Mr. Leslie, on Ms. Taylor Roy's amendment as amended.
This is complex stuff. Trying to wrap my head around where the amendment actually is at this point. But all that said, as I outlined previously, we have many things that I think we need to accomplish, and I think a subcommittee, frankly, is a good idea. So having that included in the amended version from Ms. Collins, because obviously we have many things to sort out in a forward-looking calendar for the rest of this year, and with the possible inclusion of this pre-study well into next year, and having all of those reports delayed would be quite unfortunate, and in particular due to the devastating nature of the wildfire in Jasper National Park and the rebuild and cleanup necessary there, and the work that Minister Boissonnault has been tapped to do by the Prime Minister. And I hope he is certainly looking in himself into the many factors that led up into that devastating fire and the risk that still remains in Jasper. And I think it's very timely for the people of the region of the province.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. Are we going to stay on topic here, or are we going to filibuster something that we just all agreed to?
Try to stay on topic. We don't have a lot of time left.
You know what? I will try to be brief. I will just move an amendment to a sub-amendment.
I'd like to speak to this.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Just a sec. Okay, so you have a point of order, Mr. Vancouver?
Yes, I would just like to point out that the Conservatives are putting in jeopardy having the minister here on Wednesday with
That's
this.
That's not a point of order, but it's true. Okay, so Mr. Leslie, go ahead with your amendment to.
I absolutely. I want to see the minister here to answer for.
But if this doesn't stop,
well, I also think it's important for the people of Jasper and Parks Canada to fully understand what happened to that fire. The photo op in Jasper?
Okay.
Full review. Sorry.
Okay, everybody, go ahead, Mr. Leslie. You have the floor.
I would like to move an amendment, a sub-amendment to the proposed amended motion that would add at the end of it as amended, but none shall commence until the committee has heard from Minister Boissonnault in relation to the study of the factors leading to the recent fires in Jasper National Park.
Can you put that in writing and send it to the clerk?
I can do that. I did that already. No. I have a handwritten version here. If you can read it, that would be lucky.
Well, I think we're going to have to see it in writing because it's getting a little complicated. Pardon? Well, yeah, sure. Well, until we get the amendment in writing, yeah.